We went to Fairbanks so that we could continue to Bettles and the Brooks Range. The northernmost range in Alaska runs east and west and is the Continental Divide in that part of the world. You catch a scheduled flight, this is it, from Fairbanks to Bettles. At the Bettles Airport is Sourdough Outfitters, your guide, and the one little store in town. Quickly enough, we are on the Koyukuk River and loading up the plane, which will take us to the top of the Koyukuk River in Gates of the Arctic National Park. This is wet country. This is in fact the lake that our plane landed on and where we made camp for 2 nights. There is our camp. This is the country at the lake and the country above the lake. This is the land at the crest of the Brooks Range. This is not as rugged country as the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains to the south. The mountains are more rounded, greener, less actively glaciated. It does rain there, though. Here is Ed, one of our group members, taking a picture. Here we are walking down into a valley in the Brooks Range. We'll walk up that valley for 2 days and down it for 4 days before this trip is over with. It looks pretty good from here. We didn't really quite know what we were getting into. People ask us if it wasn't cold in Alaska, and we say, oh no, it was warm. It's summertime up there. It's really nice. But most of the pictures we see of ourselves were all bundled up as if it were winter, as if we were in the Arctic, which we are. Well, there's where we had to go. There are no trails in this part of the world. This is the tundra. Very small, low-lying plants grow here, a few trees such as these. This is the country we'd walk into. This is a willow thicket. These are all willow trees. They're only knee-high, but they're trees, old trees. One of the joys of this part of the world is crossing the rivers. It had been raining for 4 days before we got there. We were on a 2-week trip, and it rained for the first 11 of those 14 days of our trip. The rivers were swollen. The tundra was wet. Here's Ed, one of the group members, coming out of waist-deep water. Here he is in some more waist-deep water. And getting out of it. Here's Chris getting out of the waist-deep water. And our guide with a pack, on him it's only thigh-deep. Here are Chris and another one of our group members walking through the bog. Here the water is probably only about knee-deep, unless you fall on one of these tussocks. A tussock is like a great big giant mushroom. If you step on the top of it, the stem falls over and you fall over, and it is no fun getting up out of the water with your pack on. In this part of the world, you are constantly walking through water. There's no point putting on dry socks in the morning because you'll be in water within the first few steps anyway, and you will remain that way all day. With a pack on your back, sometimes it's hard to crawl out of the water. Another one of our group members, Joe, only about thigh-deep on him. Here was the river we had to cross. In this part of the world, if the rivers are too big to cross, you go around them, up. We walked 2 days up this river to find a place to cross it. Then we could walk 4 days down the river. After 4 days, we were right where we started, only across a river about 200 yards wide. But this is glacial water, and if it's running fast and deep, you don't want to try to cross it. This is tundra. There's permafrost. And permafrost, if you step on it once, you get a pretty good step. If you step on it twice, you have a mud hole. If you make your kitchen in it, as we did, and eat a couple of meals there, you have a lot of mud. Here's Chris, our guide, making us dinner, wearing his rain gear. And we got a window of sunshine and some firelight to dry our clothes by one night. Took advantage of it, hung the clothes out to dry. Had a blue sky sunset. And finally we got to a lake where a plane came in and dropped off canoes for us. This plane came in and met our party with new food and supplies, and a new group member, Mike. In fact, on this part of the trip, in the canoes, our canoe tipped over and our camera went down. So from here on out, for the rest of the Brooks Range trip, we're indebted to Mike Mallon, who took these pictures and let us put them on this videotape. This is the Koyukuk River, just below the gates of the Arctic. And this is Mike Mallon, our photographer. Mike is from Adak, Alaska. Ed and Joe, two of the original group members, shared a canoe. Chris and I shared another canoe. And Mike shared a canoe with our guide. Ed, who'd been with us the whole way, was a pretty good oarsman. We weren't. We tipped her over. Here we are getting out, drying off, spreading out all our stuff to dry it out. Both of our cameras died in this effort. So did some clothes and our binoculars and some other things. The rest of our stuff got pretty wet, but we got it all dried out. And then our guide lashed two canoes together, and we had a catamaran, so we didn't have to worry about tipping our canoe over for the next 4 days. Our guide did all the steering for us. We just rowed. It was a much more worry-free way to travel. Still rained hard on us, though. But in the sun, things look pretty nice. Things are beautiful in the Brooks Range. Very different mountains from others that we're used to. Our camps were on sandbars. On these sandbars we saw a lot of tracks, both of grizzlies and of wolves, both fresh enough that they were that same day, but we didn't see the animals themselves. Here Chris and I are reading something on this sandbar and resting after lunch. You can see Chris has her high boots on. They keep your feet warm when you get in and out of the boat through all that cold water. Here I've got one boot on and one boot off. That's because I lost one boot when the canoe turned over. It was still worth wearing the other one to keep that foot dry. These are Arctic grayling. Caught them very quickly one morning at a lake. They were great with onions and butter and salt and pepper. Wear your rain gear for meals. Chris, our guide, was a real good cook. And it was nice to sit around after a meal and relax. This scenery is typical of the whole trip. The Koyukuk River ultimately flows into the Yukon and out into the Pacific. We took our canoes back as far as Bettles. So we were walking 1 week down to Koyukuk and canoeing 1 week down to Koyukuk, got back on our plane, and flew back to Fairbanks. From Fairbanks, we were back in the van, headed south, across the Tanana River, where the pipeline also crosses the same river, and it has its own suspension bridge. This was late August, and it was beginning to be fall. It stayed fall all for our entire route south.
Well, the current's moving quite fast, and it's gray, muddy looking. Haven't checked the temperature, but it's probably cold.
The two towns of Chicken and Eagle are very close to each other along the Yukon River area. And soon one leaves Alaska and enters the Yukon Territory of Canada. Coming down out of those mountains, you reach the Yukon River again. The only way to cross it is on this ferry. It's free, and it gets you to Dawson City on the other side, famous from Gold Rush times. Fall colors are everywhere. And at Dawson City, we made a detour to the north once again for just a couple of day excursion to the Continental Divide and the Ogilvie Mountains on the Dempster Highway north of Dawson City. This is the Continental Divide.